Oh, you're good. Okay, looks like we're ready to get started. And so we'll start up with council meeting follow-up from last meeting. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything that we need to talk about? Okay, anybody on council? Okay. And we'll move on to engineering fees. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be with you tonight. The engineering fees issue is one that we have struggled with from year to year, mostly because the absence of a policy really hasn't given us consistent direction over time. And basically what I'm talking about is, excuse me, the amount of money that we charge with respect to the projects that we conduct on behalf of the city for our engineers' time to oversee and or design and manage the respective projects. And so what you've seen over the years is, you know, one year it could be, you know, $3 an hour or $4 an hour or whatever. And the challenge that I worry about as it relates to those inconsistencies and the absence of a policy is that indeed it could be very tempting over time to use that mechanism as a means to try to balance the general fund budget or certain portions of the budget without real consistency for or logic or basis by which we arrange our rates and the time that we allocate towards projects. And so what we're asking for is your blessing as it relates to a policy approach that solidifies and memorializes this concept from now on. It is a very appropriate means of trying to allocate our engineers' time, particularly as it relates to projects that they're helping with. But I'm not real comfortable that if indeed our engineers are not allocated to a project for whatever reason, that we charge anyway. And so I want to be clear that one aspect of this policy would be that indeed if our engineers are not assigned to the project because other engineers have been hired or whatever, we wouldn't really have a good basis to charge their time and fees accordingly. And so I'd want you to be clear that indeed we're not trying to use this as a cash cow or, like I said earlier, a means to try to balance our budget. Each project will have different time that will require engineering effort. And as I mentioned, in some cases it would include design, in some cases it would include only management. I do have Mr. Beamer here tonight to walk us through what his expectations would be with regard to this policy. Pete is here as well, who spent a lot of time in trying to put together the approach in general. You should know that the number that we're proposing to use is a 10% percentage that we would look at with respect to the overall value of the project, which in my estimation is very competitive and not unusual with regard to what we see from private contracts for the similar services. So Mr. Mayor, if it pleases the council, if I could defer some time to Andrew and possibly Pete, if you have those questions, that'd be helpful.
Good.
Mayor, Council, this fee is relatively new in the fact that for the last 5 years ago, we never did charge out of any engineering services out of the capital fund. So within the last 5 years, we have started charging, and it's been not maybe $3 to $4 an hour, but 3 to 4% of the capital project. So that 3 to 4% has been charged against all capital projects, regardless if we did it in-house or if we outsourced it to a consulting firm for design and CA. The proposal now, primarily from finance, a financial tool, is to assess 10% of the capital fee against projects that we do design in-house and oversee construction in-house. For those that we farm out through consultants, there would be no fee assessed against that capital line at all. I'm happy to answer any questions, but it really is a finance tool to assess capital fees against engineering to account for the complete project cost.
Councilman Cathy.
Yes, what I was going to ask is even though we contract out to, say, a CEPI or whoever, doesn't city staff, a city engineer, kind of oversee them as a double check to make sure we are getting there, what we should be getting?
Mayor, Council, that's an excellent question. It is it would be a very odd project indeed that we simply sign it off to a consultant and we say, just let us know when it's done and we'll come check it. We are often involved throughout the terms of the project, but to a lesser extent than if we were to do it in-house and oversee construction directly.
And then, as a follow-up?
Sure.
What I'm interested in then is instead of the 10% that you're talking about for in-house projects, should we allocate either 1 or 2% to those projects because it is taking up city staff time?
Mayor, Council, that's certainly another mechanism by which fees could be assessed against the capital fund. What finance is proposed now is just one proposal. But certainly we do get involved during design and construction for those that we farm out to a consultant as well.
Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Beamer, this relates pretty closely to the way companies charge engineering fees internally. It looks to me like it's pay-for-service arrangement, and I would encourage you to do that, and I think it works out just fine. So, good plan.
Councilman Huber.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with what Councilman Hopkins just said. I think this is a good idea because certainly the engineering services that your office provides has value and they should be accounted for. As many of you have heard before, I'm opposed to just the blanket way that we farm out and we contract out all these engineering services. I think that the city has literally thrown away a lot of money over the years hiring outside engineers, hundreds of thousands of dollars for projects that we have paid when we could just as well have hired some competent staff, I think, for a fraction of the cost and had these guys in-house all along, and I still would encourage and hope that we can do that. I think this might be a step in the right direction there or whatever. But having made those comments, now I'll kind of get to my question, Andrew. I'm presuming this will just kind of be like a bookkeeping entry in the city financial situation. So if you could kind of walk through how this, how this would transpire. Say if there's a $100,000 project and you're doing the design, the engineering, and all that stuff on it, then 10% would be allocated over. How's that actually going to happen?
Mayor, Councilman, that's probably
then, Mr. Mayor, I might want to have a very short follow-up, depending on.
That assessment of engineering fees would occur as soon as that project became a real project. There are some projects that we won't simply get to in a fiscal year, and I think you'll be talking about a budget amendment later tonight. Some of those occurred, so we're rolling some of that money over. But as soon as we start a project, that 10% would then get assessed to that capital line item and get assigned over.
Well, and maybe I'm having trouble formulating my actual question. But so then would that 10% transfer over into your department's budget? And if so, what I'm thinking about is, every year your department gets a certain budget, the Parks Department, for instance, gets a certain budget. How's that going to work or be affected?
Mayor, Councilman, that money would not get assigned to the engineering budget, but simply back into the general fund, if that helps.
Okay. Okay, that answered my questions, thanks.
Councilman Bates.
You mentioned that the 10% is competitive with others. What is the range of that percentage, or do you guys have that rough range with that?
Mayor, Councilman, very good question. It obviously will depend upon the complexity of the project and the size of the project, but it would not be unusual for us to see a design fee anywhere in the range from 6% all the way up to 15%, and a similar range for construction administration, which is services during construction. So a design and CA fee could range anywhere between 12 and 25% of a total project cost.
And one more.
Go ahead.
I'm not against this whatsoever, but the question I have to ask is, with us choosing to do this, how is that going to affect the other businesses within the community?
Mayor, Councilman, despite Councilman Huber's thought that we farm everything out, we do a lot of projects in-house regardless. This will have little to no impact on the consulting, on the businesses out there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll go.
Okay. Councilman Cathy.
Along the lines of my initial comment and question is I would like to see them look at incorporating some type of a fee structure for the farmed out projects as well, because they are still using their staff to oversee the contractors. So, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't think the 10% by any stretch, but, you know, maybe 1% or 2%, you know, kind of look and figure how much time you spend in oversight compared to if you were doing it. And if you only spend, you know, 10% of your time, then 10% of 10% winds up at, yeah. So that's the only thing that I think that we should go ahead and go with, and I would propose that as a possible addition to this.
Okay. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pursuant to that suggestion, I guess what I would recommend is we could certainly prepare a resolution that would capture the heart of the policy that we're proposing here, and with your direction, do a little homework to include the proposal that Councilman Cathy is suggesting, and we could have it ready for the floor here maybe next time we meet in business format.
Okay. If I could ask one question of you, Andrew, in reference to what Councilman Cathy said, is there a percentage number that you would think would be fair on that for oversight on those projects that are farmed out?
Mayor, Council, yeah, I would think a percentage rate of 1 to 2% would be probably reasonable for that kind of service.
Okay. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you. I think where we're getting confused here is when you have to put together an RFP or you put together a bid package, that stuff goes into G&A, and eventually it might be charged to the project. So I think it's a flow-through thing. It's not necessary to make a number up front to do it, because those costs, you know, some RFPs may require 8 or 10 man-hours to put together and put that together, and then that may literally go to G&A and then flow out into the project later. So I'm not sure we need to address it differently than any other architectural engineering firm or large project organization would need to do it. That's the way they do it. A construction company does it. It flows into G&A and then it flows out when the project started. Does that make sense?
Well,
Apparently not.
well, what I was talking about is basically they're charging 10% to do it all, okay, on a project. And really, if you get right down to it, this is, in my opinion, this is nothing more than reallocating and shifting some of our general fund money to capital project money or to some of the enterprise funds. Like if we did all of the in-house work for the MRF, for example, then if that was a $1 million project and engineering did it all, basically the enterprise fund got a free ride because the sales tax money took care of all of the design, construction, management. This would then shift that cost to the enterprise fund and free up some of the general fund money. Yeah, that's, this is just,
That's true.
okay, and so that's why I was saying that I thought since we do supervise and oversee contracted out projects, that we do still spend the time, so there should be some amount, and, you know, I just pulled 1 or 2% out of the air. Andrew knows better what their time is, so I would leave it up to them to figure out what, but.
I would too.
Do what?
I would leave it up to them to figure
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. My 1 or 2% was just a swag, you know?
Okay. Do you have anybody else that we need to talk to on this, or you just need direction?
I think so.
Okay, so everybody in favor of moving forward with this? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And Pete, thank you for putting all of that together.
Okay, we'll move on to street outlaws. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We've been given an opportunity, at least it appears that way to this point, that the presence of the Street Outlaws program and the production company may want to extend their presence in our community beyond the initial shooting that has taken place over the last 3 weeks or so. The great news associated with this relationship is that, as was verified in the media today, or communicated in the media today, that has resulted in just about a $2 million expenditure within our community in the form of hotel rooms, in the form of meals bought at restaurants, rentals at Alcova, haircuts. I mean, it just goes on and on. And we were thrilled to hear that these two organizations may want to continue to be in our community for another, potentially even 3 more weeks. In light of that possibility, it was made known to us that a local road within the city limits would be of interest to be the site for the next season, if you will, and continue those activities there. With it comes, of course, the necessity to enter into an agreement with the production company in order to, cover a lot of the logistics and issues and so forth, aimed at keeping the taxpayers whole throughout this effort. And of course, services with regard to what the city can provide would be enlisted as well in the form of police services, standby fire services, street closure type services, and so on. We may even be facing the prospect of preparing the surface of the street that the company might select in order to more appropriately accommodate the type of activity that would be on that surface. And so we've got a lot of things that we're thinking about, a lot of things that we're working through, and certainly some details that we need to be sure we cover. A few of the major tenets of those details that I wanted to be sure you were comfortable with and understood and everything else as we try to finish up these agreements that I'm referring to are important for me to receive your input and the attorney's office and so on, as well as for the production company to be aware of as we proceed. As luck would have it, we do have a representative of the production company here tonight. If you have any real technical questions that you'd like entertained this evening, and I appreciate him being here to help us with that. One of the things that I think would help a bunch that the company has offered is with regard to working with neighbors to the project area in advance of the shoot, in advance of the activity that would be taking place. Because keep in mind, this activity would be taking place during the non-travel hours of our day, which, as you know, would be fairly late at night to early hours of the morning. Primarily during the work week, not the weekend for the most part, as I understand it. And so, in my estimation, making the neighbors aware of that type of impact would be really critical, so that they would know, what to expect. They would know what kind of noise they're hearing, if indeed they do encounter that kind of noise leakage, and so on. With regard to the area that we're talking about, they are considering Amico Road. And we are discussing a lot of details as it relates to the use of Amico Road, some of which I've already identified. Not the least of which, however, would include the direction of travel that seems to have been in some conflict with regard to residents to the previous project area. And accordingly, we're hopeful that we can keep the noise end of this effort oriented towards the landfill versus toward the residents and business owners on more of the western end of the subject area. As we started getting into these conversations, there was some discussion that indeed we were talking about starting that activity towards the end of this week that we're actually in right now. And we did find out today that we are looking at a possibility of these events commencing more in a situation or a time frame 10 days from now versus by the weekend. So we appreciate that, because it does give us some time to work through these issues, to get conversations to our neighbors, hand out business cards, etc., before all this stuff begins. The amount of days, I think, is up in the air still as well. We certainly would recommend that supporting a 3-week to 4-week time frame would be advantageous for us from an economic standpoint. But obviously, with regard to the logistics that they're facing and the needs that they have, we may be looking at something that's shorter than that. But in any case, my recommendation would be that indeed council ask questions and try to understand the major broad concepts here tonight. Give any direction that you might have with regard to what you hear either from myself, from the attorney's office, or from the production company themselves. And let us know what concerns that might involve. And we will take that direction and that foresight and try to build it into the language that ultimately shows up in the agreement that the city would have with the production company directly. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if you want to hear more details or you want to ask any questions, hopefully we're prepared to be able to deal with all the above.
Okay. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really support this. This is a good thing. And one of the things that we have that is a little bit unique to us is we have a road that's relatively isolated. It has a good bypass around that road, slightly longer. But another thing we have in the bale field, we have some big bales that are very good sound deadeners. And it could be that you could build a barrier wall if need be, because I know in Colorado especially, that's what they're putting around the oil well rigs. They're putting big bales of hay. Well, we don't have hay, but we've got bales that can be used. And so I think that, should there be a considerable issue with that, that might be one way around that, so. Anyway, thank you.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd love to hear that they're willing to go knock at neighbors' doors, talk to them, find out what issues that they have. So I give kudos to them on that. I totally support this 100%. But two questions I have. First one is, what is this going to cost the city? You talked about resurfacing the road, using the police, fire, things like that. So I'd just be kind of curious of what that will cost the city, if you don't have an answer yet, but if you do. And then real quick, I'll follow up with a question.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, I appreciate you bringing that up. We would write the agreement in such a way that the taxpayers would not have any financial burden. And I've visited with the production company to let them know that that would be our aim, and they seem to be supportive that any direct costs that the city would have in the form of using police services, in the form of potentially, moving deadening material and stuff in place, and probably even including, if the production company would like to have it, some resurfacing of the area in question. They've indicated to us that they plan to keep the taxpayers whole.
Okay. My follow-up question, I have a couple. But the other one is that I know other groups have approached Casper. Prior to me, I know I've brought it up a couple of times, of other groups wanting to do this exact same thing. The only difference is they didn't have a TV show to produce it. Can you kind of explain the difference between allowing these guys, and we have said, or prior council has said no to other individuals within Casper that has been wanting to do something like this, even in the same area? Can you expand on that if you don't mind?
Councilman Bates, Mr. Mayor, I certainly can take a crack at it, and if I could defer part of the conversation to our attorney as well, I'd be pleased to invite his participation in this answer. But in my estimation, Councilman Bates, there are two primary things that really created a significant distinction with regard to an outfit like this and others that have approached the city. And that is with regard to the level of insurance being willing to be provided, as well as the level of cost necessary to take on the safety measures that we're requiring as a part of this production. 9 times out of 10, we don't have that kind of assurance being brought to the table for conversations of this nature and for proposals in the past. Now, I certainly have talked to other entities who have approached the city with a similar request, and I've invited proposals that would include these kinds of features. And, I don't always get what I'm looking for, as it were, and certainly that would pass muster with our attorneys and risk management and the police chief. But do you mind if I defer to the attorney for a little more insight there?
Mr. Attorney?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I think the distinction here probably goes to expertise. Street Outlaws has been around for a number of years, and they really have put on operations, and they're familiar with the risk and the hazards that are available out there. And so they are coming into it, and they actually bring some expertise with them, as opposed to someone who just shows up and they want to go use our roads for a particular purpose. They have the ability to obtain waivers of their individuals. The people that they bring in are going to be well advised of the risk and the dangers associated with this. In our agreements with them, we're going to make sure that there is reference to the appropriate insurance requirements, and again, emphasizing that it would be our desire and thoughts, and in fact, we've already sent some proposals with respect to waivers if in fact they don't have waivers which they incorporate within their own system. But we haven't talked with them in that much detail yet. But those are things that are already on our mind. In addition, they have a structure, so that they have this structured so that it comes out. They're just not doing it haphazardly, because they've done it so many times. They know how these things come together. And of course, whether you're conducting a symphony or whether you're putting on a TV show, if you've done it hundreds of times, you're going to be able to have the thing go off without a hitch, and then if things go awry, you're going to be able to catch it sooner, typically, than not. Finally, the costs here. I mean, there are costs, and it could be the asphalt overlay, it could be having the police available, and they have been. And indeed, we've already received checks from our police department who provided mutual assistance when they were filming out on the bypass. And we've already been paid, by the way, for the two bills that we had submitted in that regard. And I think we still have a pending bill for that. But they're basically paying time and a half for that, as well as for the use of the vehicle. So again, they come with a financial wherewithal that a lot of people wouldn't. And finally, the fact of the matter is, this is really an interesting economic development opportunity. If Casper gets out there and we have the ability to do this, and we treat people well and with respect, we might see some more benefit from this from other TV productions. I haven't been your city attorney for long, but this will be the second operational group that have come into town filming a film here for TV. And so they bring in a certain economic pop to them. I think it gets our name out there. And so there's multiple benefits, I think, that someone just who wants to have a drag race out there would not even come close to bringing. So I think that's probably why they're getting so much more attention, and why we would be coming to you with this proposition.
And make one last comment.
Good.
I just want to let you, I didn't catch his name. Yeah, Ron. Mr. Ron, thank you. I've been from Johnny J's to Jay's Pub to Rialto Soda to many other businesses around town that have all really wanted to thank you. Tons of emails, probably 10, 15 a day. I've been receiving saying how much they are in support of you guys being here. And I wish I could read through every email wanting you to stay. So, but this is the best I can do, is tell you, you have a huge support here in Casper, Natrona County, and even further out, that they are thankful for you guys being here. And I personally thank you for being willing to come to Casper.
A good thing too, because you have a small population and you don't have a big problem with COVID. I would assume there'll probably be more production companies wanting to come here, not racing, but, filming, on the river, depending on the type of show, they're going to come here, because we might not even be able to go back to Tennessee for a while because they have some issues now. So we might want to shoot here again in the spring, and our company has about 25 different shows, from fishing to travel, all types. So we might want to, continue, and really we pay for everything. We don't expect anything other than the cooperation. And, my job as a location manager is to make sure that the public feels comfortable, and if they have issues, I address them. Like one guy called me just hypothetically, because a neighbor told him to call, and he said, who's going to, on the last show, who's going to pay for my horse when he jumps the fence?
So I said, well, it's my job as the location manager, if there is an issue with animals, that if you're able to move them to a safer place, I would pay for your time and the boarding and feed if necessary, and possibly a hotel if that was an issue. And he, you know, was amazed what I said, and he thanked me, and it was a nice conversation. So we're here to be wanted. You know, we don't want negativity. We want positive. And with the PR, I think you will get more. I'll get a lot of calls from producers saying, Ron, how was it to film here? And obviously I'm going to give them 100% yes, because, you know, the people are great, the food's good, the location, you know, your environment is phenomenal. You know, I've been traveling all over. Yesterday I was in Fort Laramie taking pictures, you know, and scouting, because I've been doing this 40 years, and I also produce movies right now in Europe. So it's nice to be here, and I've made a lot of friends.
Well, we really thank you, honestly.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you. Thank everybody.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll add my thanks to your involvement in our community, sir, and I think this is also an excellent thing, not just from an economic standpoint with this event, but also just exposing our community nationally, because we know how that worked with the eclipse, and a lot of people just discovered a community that they didn't know existed. So the only concern I have is noise, and we have had complaints from people in North Casper with the stock car races up there, and be in the same area. And so I don't really know what kind of mitigation, and that's a group of people that don't often speak up for themselves. And so I don't know if there's any way to protect them from basically having their lives disrupted by the noise factor. So I'm not in any way speaking against the project, but I just want to be sure we do everything we can to protect those folks from having their lives be disrupted. And that would be the area of town that we'd be most concerned about, and I'm sure you're aware of that already, because it's right below Amico Road. And there's sort of there's like almost like a draw that brings the noise down from above into that area. So that's my only concern.
Is there a homeowners association there that I can contact? Do you know?
I really don't know of any organizational groups that would represent the community, so I'm not sure if you guys could steer them to anyone, Reverend Pierce or anyone else in the community that might be able to say. But I think we just need to do some testing maybe to see how much noise transmission there will be, if we can.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor.
After the answer, I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Councilman Powell, you bring up a very good point, and I think that might have been some of the issues that the team experienced west of town here was noise complaints. I do want to look into the deadening option that Councilman Hopkins referenced. I do think that visiting with neighbors in advance of the activity will help a bunch. I think there's a great opportunity to invite neighbors to a neighborhood meeting to talk about the activities and talk about the duration, the time frame, and so on. That people can come and listen in and, like I said, collect business cards and so forth. There's a number of things we can do, and I think knowing this going in helps us a ton, because we want to make sure it's not a huge negative for the community either, because it has so much positive that it can bring for the larger context of our community. So with Ron's support, which he's been very nimble and giving, I think we can do a number of things to make things happen.
Councilman Powell.
And I don't know how common this is for you, sir, but we have a member of our council who knows a little bit about horsepower and has actually been on racetracks. And I wonder if, for Councilman Cathy's benefit, if you've ever allowed a celebrity driver.
Maybe we could do a show about that.
That was the comment I was going to make, is I wish I still had my vet.
I'm done. Thank you.
All right, Councilman Bates, go ahead.
You sure? Because I know I've asked a lot of questions.
No, go ahead, I'll follow after you.
Okay. I know that some have reached out about audience seating. For a lot of them would like to be able to come, sit, watch it. I don't know as far as if that there was very much on the West Belt Loop, but is that I know we're talking about a narrower place, but is that
You mean public watching? Well, the problem there is, number one, liability, and number two, the COVID, because we have to get tested every day. We have a policeman right past the roadblock with nurses, because we're doing this. Everybody, like for instance, most of the crew went home right now. So if we start up in 10 days or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they have to get tested before they arrive here with a letter. They have to email us. And then the day that they arrive, they have to be retested. And it's a 24-hour turnaround. And so far, nobody's been positive, And then all the producers have to get tested every week, with the swab. But every day the crew has to be, with the electronic thermometer, they have to test it. And if someone was over 99.8 or whatever it is, they can't go on set. They have to be quarantined. So we have strict bylaws, so it would be hard. I mean, I'm sure we can get a few officials, so to speak, to watch, but the general public, there's really not, especially on that road, there's not a lot of room. And we can't really give out the results, because if someone's there, they'll know who's winning, and then things get out of, even the drivers, they have their own Facebook websites. And matter of fact, the barrister at the hotel serving coffee knew more about the show than I did in the first night. She had a map to the location, and, it was just that someone from the public was excited and let the public know what was going on. But we have to kind of be low-key, because even the drivers, up to the last minute, know the area they're going to be in, but they're not supposed to know what road they're on. And we even have a policeman during the day, every day, even because we shoot only, this is another thing, the most we would shoot would be 12 days over a 3.5-week period. So it's 3 days a week. We've been doing mostly Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then one day it was windy, so at midnight we had to stop. We did the interviews of the drivers, and then we had to pull the plug. And on the Thursday, our day off, we were able to do the race. So the most would be 4 days, but we try to do 3 days a week. And so unfortunately, it would be hard to have the public there.
okay? It was a question that
Sure, no, it's a good question.
I thought I'd throw it out there. Thank you very much.
Right.
So I just want to make a few comments, and I guess to follow up on yours, I kind of look at it like we have law enforcement on both ends of that. It's a closed set. I mean, you wouldn't go watch a movie get produced, you'd know what the outcome was at the end. So you wait for it to actually come on TV, and that's part of the reason too that it's closed. We talked to the county commissioners about their biggest concerns in this, and it was complaints, and I think that they've identified that not reaching out to citizens in the beginning to let them know what was happening, when it was going to happen, is where that problem came in. And I'm sure, as you and I have talked, I'm sure that you close down the West Belt Loop for an extended period of time like that, and that's heavy truck traffic going through there, that's going to foster complaints too. However, Amico Road is not a major road. I don't know how many people go down that road between 6 p.m. at night and 6 a.m. in the morning, but it's not going to be that many. And they can certainly be rerouted around there. Concerns that I had when we started talking about citizens was, Sunlight Drive. I think that's an easy one. There's probably 10 residents down there that need to be really notified. North Casper is a little bit of concern, but we've had the race car track up there for years. And, you hear it all the time. I mean, that's where it's located at. But I was more so maybe concerned more about Bar None. But I received an email today from Patrick up there, the mayor, who's all in favor of this and says absolutely. And you guys have been doing.
Shut the road down. I didn't know this. This was like something, but he heard that the races needed to practice, so he had the fire department shut the road down. If I would have known about it, I would have had a sheriff there.
Right,
But he let them race during the day.
up on Westwind.
Yeah.
They closed Westwind Road down up there.
Right.
So they're in favor of it. So, you know, I mean, if the mayor of bar none has stepped up and said, look, you know, this is a good thing and we don't have issues, and I think the bar none end of it's pretty much, pretty much covered. So I'd like to see us, you know, as you said, go out and let the public know that this is gonna happen. If in fact it's voted upon to do so, but, you know, doing that front end, and then I don't know if I'd take bales from the bale fill and trash and stick them out there. I mean, but if we could maybe look at some way of deadening the, you know, the sound up there, and just look at it, see if it's a possibility to do that, and that would just mitigate it even more to where we don't really have any issues to deal with. I would say on the positive side of this, you know, I think we looked at what CNFR brings in, and that's the exact same amount as what this has brought in to this community. And we lost CNFR due to COVID. We've lost a lot of things due to COVID. And, you know, honestly, if you're here for the same amount of time and we have the same results or similar results that come out of that, to me, that's a win-win. And I think it goes beyond. I've had restaurants call me, you know, numerous businesses call me, but to the extent of Alcova, you guys have been out there renting boats, and people have been to auto, well, there's body shops, obviously, they've gotten a hold of us, but also car dealerships. There's been some vehicles. Yeah, 2 vehicles have been bought. So, you know, I appreciate the fact you guys are here, and it was my understanding you have more shows beyond this.
Yeah, they're formulating right now, and the issue we have is weather, because we know starting in October, we gotta hold back because it could snow, and, you know.
Could do that in September too.
Right,
But,
sure.
but right. But in my opinion, you know, I listen to what the commissioners say, but I really, in my opinion, in listening to business owners and other mayors, I just think it's this. I don't see a real big downside to this. So I wanted to get that out there, and those are my comments. Anybody else have anything else? Okay, well, so we're taking a vote. Thumbs up. We're good with it.
Thank you.
Across the board. Thank you for being here, everything you've done.
Glad I'm here. You know, I appreciate that we have the opportunity. Hopefully, this could be an ongoing process.
I do have one more question. You have a driver that was involved in an accident. Is he?
Yeah, I haven't heard. I know he broke his thumb and a few ribs, but I'm sure he's getting better.
Sure.
And the other driver walked away from it because, you know, they have great, you know, metal shell on them, so they're used to. Unfortunately, once in a while there is an accident, but the safety record's been pretty good. And you know, we have a stunt man there. Matter of fact, you know, every location we go to, he has to approve it first to make sure if that there's enough room for the car in case they veer off, that they're not going into a gully, because some of the side, you know, areas off the freeways have deep gullies for the water, and that we'd have to put hay bales and do a lot of stuff, and sometimes we do that. But it seems like that road might work for us, and there's a chance we might only shoot the road for a few days, because they're formulating some new shows where there's women drivers, only women driving, and so we might only end, you know, depending on how it works out time-wise and scheduling, we might only need the road for, let's say, 3 days on this way, and maybe in the spring do more, you know.
Okay.
It all depends. But I should know better by Friday. I think I should know what we're doing for the next 6 weeks, give or take.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, sir.
Great, thank you. All right, I appreciate it. And should I leave some cards in case they, yeah, that way. And here's,
If you decide you need a celebrity driver, give me a call.
right, okay. Here's 2 more of these, just so you can see, that's on the West Beltwood, the footprint. Yeah, let me, 1 second here.
Mr. Mayor, if Councilman Kathy goes up there, I would suggest a double shift at the fire department.
Now, wait a minute.
That's a low blow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate it. All right, have a great night, everybody. Nice meeting you. Hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Take care. Yeah, that was a low blow.
Okay, we'll move on to fiscal year 2021 budget amendment number 1. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We are at the point where we need to wrap up fiscal year 20 and bring the projects and so forth that either didn't get completed or started with their corresponding budgetary authority forward into the new fiscal year. And there's a lot of those projects and elements of the previous budget that we do need to carry forward. In fact, I believe that the total carryover request is in the neighborhood of $7.8 million. Keep in mind, this is not new money that we're asking for. This is not new budget authority really that we're asking for. We're just asking basically for a continuation of that to move forward into our new budget year. If I could get Mr. Pitlick to approach the council and advise you on some of the major topics that this amendment covers, I'd sure appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. As Carter mentioned, there are basically two components to the budget amendment number 1. The first and larger component is the carryover request. That again are for projects that have been budgeted last year and mostly not started, so that expenditure authority has been requested to be carried forward. Some of the larger items on there, there's like $2.3 million for the landfill closure cover project, about $800,000 for the McKenzie Lake project, and some Midwest Avenue reconstruction money to be carried forward. And there's also $600,000 for a fire engine that was to be purchased last year that never got the order completed. So those are some of the major things on the carryover request. The other component, which is listed on attachment B, is what we consider supplemental funding request. So these are items that, projects that have not been previously budgeted and are requesting expenditure authority for. And just to touch on a couple of those, one of the items is the expenditures related to the recycling program. You'll recall that was discussed after the budget was approved to reopen that business venture. So those are the funds that are needed to accomplish that. There's also a project in the wastewater treatment plant for $657,000 for a digester boiler installation. Well, that is a new project. The funding is to be brought forward from other projects that either were savings on or the projects will be delayed. So while it is a new project, and that's why it's in this category, there is funding available through previously budgeted projects. Then there's a couple in there that were grants that we needed to, we became aware we'd be getting, so we need to get the expenditure authority for that. Then also $142,000 for the dog park in East Casper. That the funding is the funding has been secured, and we just needed to have that project and the expenditure authority put into the budget. So the total of those is about $1.6 million. And it sometimes happens, just because the way the budgeting process works, sometimes an expenditure will show up twice. An example that would be in the capital fund. You'll notice $131,000 is a transfer to aquatics, and that is to cover expenditures for opening up the pools. So that shows up in expenditure in the capital fund. It gets transferred into the aquatics fund, but then we also have to have the expenditure authority to spend that in the aquatics fund. So that bottom number gets inflated a little bit simply because of the budgeting process that we have to create the expenditure authorities. with that, if there are any questions, try to answer.
Councilman Bates, Carter, I have a question. In reference to the dog park, the expenditure of $142,000, didn't we cap that at wasn't there a, and maybe Tim can answer this better, but wasn't there a $100,000 donation or gift that was given by the family? And I thought we capped it at 100 after we talked about that several times. But maybe I'm wrong.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think you are. The total contribution was in the neighborhood of 140,000. And actually, I would invite probably Mr. Cortez to come up and address this with a little more detail. We also thought that we heard some direction as it relates to specific components that you would like to see included. And we think that we're probably going to need that full gift in order to make those components happen. And if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, if I could have Tim kind of go through that.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, dead on to what the manager just said. What we discovered was the total, as part of that planned development, the McMurrays were required to set aside little over $140,000 for parks and kind of public use. When we originally capped that money, we thought that some of that money would need to go to some pathway projects that were a little bit kind of further by Murado, kind of where those high tension power lines are. But looking at it closer, that'd probably be a project we'd want to undertake at a later date just because there's no other infrastructure to connect any of it to. So since the money is restricted, meaning we really can't use it for anything else, we thought it would be smart to carry over the entire amount, and we'd probably come back to council at a later date and say, hey, this is kind of what we think that additional 30-ish thousand could do, meaning probably some pathway connections or a pathway around the actual park, and that way it's at least connecting to some other infrastructure.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yep, it did. Thank you. Councilman Bates.
I have two questions. The one, what was it? 1.6 million, is that included in the 7.8 million? So at the total carryover funding request is 7,861,324 on here, but then you mentioned attachment B is 1,675,398. Is the 1 million included in with that 7 million?
Mayor, Councilman Bates, it is not included as a separate component. And when you see the resolution that you'll be asked to pass to push this amendment through, the total is going to be $9,538,722.
Oh, okay. And I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to phrase it, and I'm going to chop it, so if anybody on council hears what I'm saying and can help me out with it. But nothing against the social media or news media, but I can see the posts now that Casper approves $9.5 million for next year's budget of everything, and that's what they're going to spend. And then you're going to get people on there that's going to go, wait a minute, we're in a crisis situation, and you guys are going to spend that much. Is there any way we can explain to them, I guess in a simple form of, I guess regarding this money, to help understand that it's not we're just going, hey, we got this money, we're going to just spend it on whatever we think. Am I asking that correctly, I guess? I just want to make sure that people know that we're not just throwing this money out, that much money, and that's exactly what we're going to do with that. So if you don't mind expanding.
Mayor, Councilman Bates, and that is, again, a good question. The best way to explain it, I believe, is that, again, this is not new money that's been allocated. It's money in projects that have been discussed with council and approved by council in the previous year's budget. And just for reference, the amount varies from year to year, just depending upon the size of the projects and how many never got started. Last year, this amount was over 18 million. So we're substantially less in projects that we're asking to carry forward than we were last year at this time.
But Vice Mayor Lutz.
You took the number right out of my mouth. I was just going to bring up the fact that I was trying to remember, and I thought it was 18-ish last year that we carried over. So I guess what that means to me is that we're not lagging behind so far on projects, as far as like getting projects completed or at least started. So that's obviously good news that we're not behind on that. The other thing is, as far as the media goes, number one, they're going to say what they want to say. I mean, I'm not trying to say that mean, but because this info packet that we all have in front of us is public information. And the good thing is if they want to look at this attachment B, it actually has a column that shows the funding source for the additional 1.6 million, like the, not new money, but the new money. I mean, it has a column that actually shows them the funding source of where all that money is coming from. And so I would advise anyone listening who is concerned as to where that money is going to come from to reference this attachment.
Thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Yeah, I'm not an accountant, and I just kind of address kind of what Ken had said too, that I think that when you look at it, we can't stop whatever is going to go on social media, how the news reports that. But what I do want to do is I want to come to the defense of our staff who work incredibly hard at helping to balance our budget. We're solvent. We balanced our budget. We're there, and we do a very good job, contrary to, I think, what's been some of the political statements that have been made. Contrary to that, we work very hard to do that. We trust our staff. We have incredibly talented, intelligent staff that do that, Tom and Pete and that whole entire department. And so to stand forward to say we're there, we are incredibly conservative to what we try to do. And I think we try to crunch those numbers and try to make sure that we make good choices, but we also rely on our staff who are very intelligent, very good at what they do, and we rely on that. So kudos to them, and I hope that's reported, because that needs to be known that we work real hard with that, and you guys do an amazing job.
Thank you for those comments. And I also just want to reassure council, by the time this gets to you, it has been vetted through finance, through the departments that have requested it, through the city manager's office. So there's not a rubber stamp. So every project is questioned and reviewed for necessity and the availability of funds.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think there is some value in discussing this and underlining and highlighting the fact that we are not spending millions and millions of dollars of more money. This is money that has already, in some cases long ago, been designated, appropriated, accounted for, and in ongoing projects. And to me, to the social media, I would say this: it would be incredibly foolish if we were to say that, well, we've got this project that's going on, but it didn't get done by the end of the fiscal year, so we're just going to chop it off. That would be just an incredibly foolish outcome. I think this is good stewardship of the public money, very conservative stewardship, but I would emphasize that this is not $9 million of more spending. This is just an accounting entry carrying it over into the next year so that we can get these already started projects done in a business-like fashion. Any business would do this. There's no business that would have said, oh, it's the end of the year, we're going to shut down.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Parks and Recreation Facility Lease Agreement Template. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. One of the challenges that we face with regard to being an organization that that has a multitude of leases and lease agreements with partnering agencies and tenants and so on, is that there tends to be a pretty wide variety of understandings and agreements and features and pieces and parts that become really challenging to manage and anticipate. And certainly when you're having a discussion with the parties involved, you know, a lot of work is necessary, obviously, to be prepared for those conversations, because each lease can be a different feature with everything that we do. Having recognized that, Mr. Cortez recommended that we do some work with the attorney's office to try to standardize our lease agreements so that we can generally anticipate what it is that we, you know, will plan for. Furthermore, I hope that it will level the playing field with regard to what our partner entities can expect to sign on to when they come in the door. As we move forward with regard to trying to service these agreements and so forth, I'm hopeful that with some level of standardization, we can improve the lease relationships that we have, and ultimately be able to report to our constituency and the taxpayers on a more reasoned, consistent basis with regard to what their facilities and relationships look like. Having gone through this evaluation, Mr. Cortez has some recommendations that not only include a more standardized approach, but as it relates to the wide variety of situations that we can anticipate, standardized options that potential partners can evaluate for their own purposes and their individual circumstances. And so, if it's okay with the council, pleases the council, I'd like to invite Mr. Cortez up to walk us through what some of those features are. And we would certainly invite any question that you have, any direction that you have, any other options we should consider, so that as we move forward, we have at least a better understanding of what we can plan for moving forward.
Okay. Mr. Cortez?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Carter did a great job of kind of teeing that up and kind of at least why we're looking at it. We have some pretty big leases coming up this year that we're not used to having on an annual basis. We're always dealing with annual leases in my department. We service at least 24 of those, and one of the big ones you'll understand would be Mike Lansing Field. That's been under a 20-year lease, so it's something we haven't visited in quite some time. But we also have Tanny and Washington Fields, and so what it kind of really just invites is a really good time to discuss the topic. And I'll just say the reason that we see a lot of these leases and their variances within them is probably just because they have different nuances. You know, they're handled by different user groups at different times, different decades even. And so it just makes sense that we would see some different items within them. So we understand, I guess me and my staff understand the kind of the differences and why they've been there. But with what I just said with regard to some of the leases that are expiring this year, now's a kind of a perfect time, we think, to visit with you as council to say, hey, does this approach appeal to you, or would you like us to continue what we're doing now, which is kind of more of a customized effort, if you will, which is totally legitimate. And we realize that you as political officials get kind of lobbied by different groups, you know, to say, hey, this is coming up, and, you know, we used to play softball, and this is a chance for us to get a better lease agreement on softball, you know, and it's, I can understand that you're kind of torn there because you want to help those friends out or those people out that you've been involved with for so many years, and that's probably why we see some of the differences that we see, and it's neither good nor bad in our opinion. We just really want to get this in front of you, and this is kind of our best stab. Before I dive into maybe the document, is there any questions maybe at this point, or?
Councilman Huber.
Are all of these lessee entities all 501c3 nonprofits?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would say the majority of for surely are, but it would be really difficult for me to say all of them. We do have some entities that do want to make a profit, whether they lease directly from us or sublease from another group. That would probably be a distinction I would have to lean on.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This weekend, I had the opportunity to go up and accept a plaque for the city, which I will provide to you, Mr. Cortez, and the city manager. And this is one of the longest leases we've ever had within our city. And in my years on council, my years in living in Casper, I don't think we've ever received a complaint about the air bottlers guys. Their land is always clean, it's picked up, it's taken care of, and I don't know that we've ever invested a penny in it since the first lease, because they built their own building and they take care of it. So this is kind of the guy on one end of the spectrum. However, we have people on the other end of the spectrum that every time somebody wants to use that facility, it's a fight. And those are the ones that we really need to address. There are some people that take advantage of their position. And I'm getting kind of tired of that. Thank you.
Okay.
Fair enough. And Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that Carter addressed that really well when he said, you know, kind of levels the playing field for everyone a little bit. Kind of an endeavor is kind of what we're undertaking here. So, you know, that's in the spirit of what we're trying to do for sure. I'm not going to walk through this sample lease agreement in its entirety, so please don't think that. I just want to kind of maybe talk about maybe 4 or 5 of kind of the bigger components and get your feedback, and just so you kind of have an idea of what we're looking at here. So the first page is pretty much typical stuff that you'd see in any lease agreement. It's really standard. The next few pages are kind of really about the only differences you'll see, and then towards the end of the document it gets very standardized, once again very boilerplate that you'd see in about any lease agreement. But you'll notice, I'll look at number 4 for instance on page 2 real quickly. You'll just see fees. Fees are probably one of the major components that we'll have in a lease agreement. And that hourly rental fee, that option 1 that you see there, keep in mind that as somebody gets a lease from us, they won't see all of this. They'll either see option 1 or option 2 or option 3, and then the rest will go away. But option 1 is kind of for those people that are just coming in for an hour or two, quickly they want a park reservation or they want to rent our clubhouse for a short period of time. And so there's kind of a different fee structure, as you can imagine, that would go with that, versus if you go down to option 2, which is probably one of our more common leases that you're familiar with, is kind of that exclusive use. They have a long-term commitment. They're going to be in that facility exclusively for a year, 2 years. In the case of, you know, Legion at Lansing, 20 years. And so therefore we'd have a different fee structure for them, which typically you'll see here is based on a per player is what we look at. So if they have a bunch of players that are paying money and sponsorship fees and stuff like that, we extract a little bit more to help subsidize, you know, offset subsidies that we have in our facilities. And likewise, if they have a bad year like what we have this year with the pandemic going on, their player counts are way down, we obviously won't see as much of a return from them as a result of that. The option 3, I'll just quickly say, is just for concessions. We do have a handful of leases that we have in our facilities where we have people that sell food, beverage. I mean, that's everything from, say, down at the softball fields, people that are selling candy and popcorn, up to, you know, like John Johnson, for instance, at the 19th hole. You know, so we have a variety of stuff. Assignment and subleasing, this is kind of a major component that some of you on council would be familiar with. Right there, option 1 just says, hey, you can't sublease. And that's really for those people that are coming for short-term rentals. We don't expect them to be subleasing their 2-hour rental to somebody else, you know, for a profit or to break even or whatever. But option 2, I'd really quickly point to is that what I've discovered in my short time as the director for Parks and Recreation is people sometimes, with the city's blessing, will sublease out a facility that they have kind of exclusive use to. In a lot of respects, that's a great thing because we increase the use and it gets more visibility and we get more players involved. What's unique in this and the way it's worded now is that we would see a percentage of those sublease proceeds that other entity is making basically on the city of Casper property, the public property. And so this is a feature that we're not used to, that I think is something to at least visit about and say, hey, if entity A is going to give entity B $100,000 to sublease that facility, shouldn't the taxpayers kind of see some of that come back towards them? Because at the end of the day, it's their facility. And those percentages could be negotiated. You know, obviously you can see it's kind of, it says 50-50 right now, but we could modify that based on the nuances of, you know, program A and program B type thing. But I would point that as probably being one of the major components of this document in front of you. The rest of that page is pretty boilerplate that you'd see in any document.
Councilman Cassidy.
Item 6, concessions. What do we do about the concessions at Field of Dreams, at Mike Lansing, at our other facilities? Because here concessions are only listed as far as Crossroads is concerned.
Mayor, Council, that could be a good catch, meaning we might have to open it up to be more generic. However, I can't off the top of my head say that there's not another concession facility that isn't handled under an entirely separate agreement. Meaning like the 19th hole in and of itself is an entirely separate agreement?
No, I was talking about like the Field of Dreams. We lease it out, don't we?
Correct.
What happens to the concessions that are sold there?
That's a good point. We'd probably have to maybe make the terminology a little bit more generic so that it's not just specific to Crossroads. I think
that's what I was getting at is this sounds like they're going to get to keep all of that and it's only Crossroads that would wind up reimbursing us for anything. So that was why I was asking about that.
Yep. Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that could be a good catch. We'll take a look at it, make sure that if we need to open it up and make it more generic, we certainly will.
And Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim, going back to Bob's concern, I don't know if you were in charge at this point, but some time back we had a group come before us who wanted to start a women's softball team. And we eventually leased the Sycamore field to them. But they had approached a baseball club that I will not name about sharing their facility. And they said they got nothing but roadblocks, but there apparently was some kind of a provision in the lease that required that club to share the facility with other user groups. And I don't remember that exact language, but I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but and they were essentially in violation of the lease by not sharing it. And so I wonder, and I'm big on sharing facilities. There's no sense having a facility just taking up space if there's someone who can use it. And this group was very frustrated with this situation. And of course, it all depends on, as you say, who you're listening to as far as the story that you hear. But I would encourage you to look at that lease to see what that language looked like, to see if we can basically have something in the agreement that says a legitimate request to sublease can't be denied. Because as Bob points out, there have been cases where people will sign these leases and they treat our facility that we own like it's their personal backyard. They own it and they get to decide what happens with it, and they don't have to answer to anyone. And so, and again, I don't know if there's some legitimate counterpoint to that argument, but I felt for this group because they were just trying to get a girls softball team to go, and again, they couldn't find a place to play. And then they used arguments like, well, the grass has to rest, or who knows what it was. But do you remember, were you involved with that at all, Tim? And do you remember that clause that said that it had to be shared?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell, I just as I was coming in, that was kind of a discussion point, but we've also had that exact same issue within other facilities, for sure. And we'll work with the attorney's office to see what kind of language we can develop, because it is tricky, because you can put in what you think sounds pretty reasonable for sharing purposes, but there'll be like a sentence that says, hey, but unless they're doing practice or so-and-so's doing this activity, then you can't. And then, believe it or not, user groups will kind of plan to do things just to kind of prevent somebody else from getting that. It does happen, you know, not I'd like to say not often, but it does happen. So I certainly made that note to see if there's something we can tune up as far as, you know, sharing cannot be denied type thing, because I like how you put that. And we'll track in some of those other leases to see if if we got something that we think can be modified or just work right out of the box.
Or if I may follow up, Mr. Mayor, would you consider or look into the possibility of this template allows a renewal up to 2 times for a total of 3 years, to say, and renewal of the lease will take into account the level of cooperation we have seen with the user group, with other groups in the community, or something like that. It's kind of a shot across the bow that if you do these kinds of things to lock other people out, we're going to take that into account at the point of renewal.
Certainly look at that.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Huber.
With reference to part of what Councilman Powell was talking about there, I think that one way to address that might be to just put some language in there that, in essence, requests to share shall not be unreasonably denied or withheld. And that might be a way to work that, because you got that language has to be fair to both sides there. But I absolutely agree with what Charlie's saying, that you know, some of these outfits get these leases and think this is my private property now. But anyway, though, in looking at this, and for instance, on the top of page 3, under the assignment thing, and in several of these clauses, there's a potential, it says option 1 determined by the city, option 2 determined by the city. Are you wanting for the council to go through and say, we want to have all of these leases exercise option number 1 in clause 5 and number 2 in clause 3, or would those be options that your department would exercise individually in leases? Or I'm just trying to figure out the structure of how we want to go through this.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, if I understand your question correctly, we would be kind of helping to steer that user group into what option would probably be most appropriate. Meaning there might be a discussion that we have to have with the user group to kind of tell them like, hey, this is, but for the most part, we were looking at that we would determine it, and they just wouldn't see the other options. They would just see that option that they're going for, which they're going to say, hey, we want exclusive use of that structure, and then for us, we would go, okay, well, that means this in this particular section.
So is what you're saying is that, say, if you have user group number 1 and user group number 2 over at a different facility, that user group number 1 might have a lease that exercises, that includes option 1, option 4, option 5, you know, different options and different clauses than what user group number 2 at a different facility would have. They might have option number 3 and then option number 1 and then that's what you're talking. So it wouldn't be exactly the same in every single thing.
Correct.
And that discretion would rest with you and your department.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
As far as some of the other insurance indemnification and immunity, that's something we worked with risk management and the attorney's office to kind of tighten up that language. As you can imagine, that language evolves over time. So you'll see a variety of different things throughout our different leases. One of the major components I'd point to would be number 16, which is on maintenance. Once again, something that's not set in stone. This is, I'll just kind of tell you what the differences we see is different facilities, different leases will have different thresholds for which the city is responsible to fix things at that facility. So what we really see right now is a lot of $250, $500 type thresholds, meaning if a light bulb's out in your facility, it's on you as the user group to get the light bulb replaced. But if it crosses over $250, you can pick up the phone and us as the landlord, if you will, we go make that repair. What you'll see here, after visiting with our buildings and structures department, they said that 250 for sure is kind of a very low threshold that it's probably pretty antiquated. In the 500 probably isn't quite enough. So they recommended to us a $750 threshold, meaning if you get some labor involved and some pieces and parts to get some things fixed, you know, it's anything below that 750, you know, they thought was justifiable for the user group to, you know, pony up and kind of have that extra skin in the game, if you will, with regard to the facility. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. What you'll see in maintenance also is that there are some different options there, but once again, that basically boils down to is it somebody that's in the facility for a long time, which is that option 1, versus option 2, which is somebody's just coming in for the hourly day use rental, which that falls on us to maintain the facility. Last one I'll probably tackle without any questions, because then it gets pretty boilerplate, would be number 18, and that's just regarding utilities. Once again, option 1 is kind of that short term, hey, you know, we're going to come and use this for a day or two. We're not going to have them pay the electrical fee or utilities or whatever. We're going to pick that up, versus option 2, which is that long-term lease where for the most part we currently have the user group or whoever's having the facility pay for those utilities. And I would say that that's probably the major components. I think as the city manager said, we're just kind of throwing something out there for now to kind of percolate if this is a path you'd like us to continue down. We can reel in some of the good catches that we already had here, and if you have some future ones, we'd be more than happy to take them. If you would like to kind of continue with more of the customized manner that we've done them probably for, you know, decades, that's certainly all right as well. With that, I'll ask for any questions.
Councilman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim, I think this comes under the category of nuances for leases. Is it true that Lansing Field is the only facility we have where there was significant advertising revenue? Because I know that was a major part of the drama we had with the subleasing of that facility, and I wonder if we shouldn't get a cut of that since we own it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, it depends probably on your definition of significant, you know, but I can tell you we have other facilities that generate advertising revenue. The Ice Arena would probably be like one that really comes to mind real quickly, because they kind of raise their revenue in the same manner for the program as what Legion and which you're probably alluding to is the horse heads, and kind of what that pie split looks like. And of course, the inventory versus what they charge for it can also play a big piece in what they're getting. But I think the comment's very fair, meaning, you know, if they're generating revenue off of that city facility's inventory, in this case, advertising space, you know, should the city get a portion of that? Fair question.
Something to think about.
Sure.
Councilman Hopkins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, Mr. Cortez, I commend you for taking this ball of yarn on, if you will. This is a tough one because the range of people that we have doing this is really different. Everybody's got their own interests, but I think we really need to do some standardization in order to get her done. And I would encourage you to, like utilities, we just say, okay, this is what it costs to operate that place on an hourly basis. Why don't we put it in our budget? Then we get rid of that. And another way to go about that is say, okay, we don't have anything released by the year or by the 20-year period. You give me the dates you want, and you can bid on them. So just some options, but I commend you for taking this animal on because it's not easy.
Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question to you, Mr. Tim. You said that there's, or I guess Mr. Carter mentioned that there are leases that are coming up that are due here soon, so we want to get them on this here. Have you guys reached out to them about what they think regarding this, or feedback from those entities or whatever? Just wondering if you got any feedback from them, I guess.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, we probably really haven't gotten that far. I think I think Carter and I both kind of wanted to get your temperature for if this was kind of a direction you think would be a worthy endeavor, because I think Councilman Hopkins is dead on. It's kind of a little bit of a ball of yarn, and it is different. So we really haven't got that part. I think what you would find, though, just speculating with a high degree of certainty, is those groups would probably just look at those specific items like a term length or the fee structure, and they would probably point those as probably the minor points of contention, or maybe major points of contention, especially maybe on a term lease. For somebody that, say, for instance, is used to having a 20-year lease, and now all of a sudden we're saying, hey, we're looking at more like a three-year lease. But I would also point that, me and my staff have kind of taken direction from council in a lot of respects with contract lengths. And it seems like this current council and councils of the past are pretty reluctant to do anything past 5 years. That definitely something not set in stone. We could do 5 or whatever. It was just kind of a good starting point at a 3-year type scenario. But the answer to your question plainly at this point is no, we haven't reached out to them quite yet. But we're hoping this would be a kickoff for the discussion should council think this might be a direction we might want to go.
I gotta say you did a great job.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, thank you. I would have to point to our new recreation manager, Phil Moya, did a really nice job working with the attorney's office, and he did a nice product here, no doubt.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we're looking for thumbs up to move forward with it. Okay, looks like we're good. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to troopers funding discussion. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Council knew that this proposal or a proposal was coming forward from the troopers organization. And as you can imagine, the troopers have had a rough season given the conditions of our time. They have put their thoughts together with a proposal that would involve the use of Fort Casper, or at least a part of the campus anyway, wherein they would like to install some flower beds. And with regard to those flowers, pursuant to a memorial kind of sponsorship, put flowers in honor of those individuals, whomever that might be, and continue their maintenance and throughout the season. My concern was that indeed we would be, putting forward public property for private property or private gain, and that did cause me concern. After visiting further with the city attorney and with Mr. Cortez, and certainly with the troopers organization themselves, I feel like I've come to a level of comfort with this idea in that we do have in place a memorial sort of donation policy that allows us to do these kinds of things under these kinds of circumstances. And indeed, with regard to the ability to define the scope and define the place and the time frame and the quality of which these kinds of projects are put into place, you know, we have a lot of control with regard to some of the things that would otherwise cause us consternation, thanks to the policy that's already here. So, given that there is a really natural connection between Fort Casper and the troopers, and a very long legacy between the two organizations, and the policy that is in fact driving, you know, that has the potential to drive this discussion in a lot of ways, I feel comfortable that you know, I could at least recommend support of this program, and hopefully bring to bear some real legitimate assistance that the troopers are in need of. Not unlike many agencies throughout our community, but certainly given the connection that they have with Fort Casper, the very clear ambassadorship that they've maintained on behalf of our city all over the country, we have a number of things working in our favor that make this program very doable. With that, Mr. Mayor, I would certainly invite any comment that the attorney would have in this regard. And certainly, again, the questions that you might have, so that we can try to vet those and determine which way you'd like to go.
Mr. City Attorney.
Great, thank you, Mayor, Council. Actually, the fact that this was paired and came right after the Parks and Recreation Facility lease agreement template is pretty good timing. You know, one of the advantages of having a lease agreement template is so that when you go into a negotiation, you know those things that you need to be attentive to, and the areas where you want to be looking at, you know, how much revenue should we be asking for, you know, what type of insurance do we need, you know, what are our options here. Similarly, though, with respect to this request, which kind of came out of the blue, you actually had a policy that you adopted back last September. And it's a pretty lengthy policy, and it talks about establishing provisions and procedures for accepting donations, memorials, and sponsorship contributions. And so that is a policy that, you know, in visiting with Tim, we thought fit the situation here pretty well, and provides a guideline and some thresholds that you've approved and looked at, as well as the Parks Division and Recreation Division have looked at and are going to be implementing as these type of opportunities come up. And so here you have an opportunity to improve the campus of Fort Casper, and also get community involvement, and perhaps increase a little bit of philanthropy, and also help one of our kind of nonprofits that's had a tough time, but always is out there kind of putting Casper's names around the country. So we don't have much hesitation with it. There's always the concern that these things can go awry or people try to take advantage. But again, you have the policy in place pursuant to your resolution 19195, and we think that would again give the Parks and Recreation Department plenty of leeway to say, no, we don't need that. If you want to give something, we've got a whole list of opportunities here if you want to give a sponsorship contribution to the city of Casper, and here they are. So that's all I have, unless you have some questions.
Councilman Huber.
Well, Mr. Henley, so you don't see any public property for private use problems here?
You know, I don't. Basically,
okay, that was all I wanted to make clear.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Councilman Bates. Sorry.
Just out of curiosity, have we never done something like this before?
Mayor, Council, it's pretty similar to what we've did over at Crossroads with the Rotary. basically there it was the city's property, and you have a nonprofit that comes in, and they want to make a contribution to the city, but to fund that, what they're doing is going out and getting requests for donations, and then those people get to put their name on the sign in front of the playground for a period of time. So it is similar to that. Here, there's a little bit of a nuance in that part of the money, it won't all go towards building the playground or putting in the flowers and the flower beds and the like, but they're going to be adding labor and paying for the flowers. But here also, they will be then taking a little bit of that contribution they've received and hanging on to it to further their nonprofit endeavors.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, if I might add to that a little bit, probably another practice that is even more similar to what's being proposed is when folks purchase a tree on behalf of a loved one that passed away, and then plant that tree in the park with a little memorial plaque kind of a thing. Or in some cases, I've seen folks purchase a bench with a little memorial plaque that is added to a pathway or something to that effect. We do have a fairly long-standing practice of that kind of a program being in place, although not nearly as well memorialized as this resolution captures as of a couple years ago.
So they'll be kind of the first one to start this, something like, or this exact thing.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, maybe on a scope of this nature, I would say this probably is an embarking project, but certainly on a much smaller scale, we've seen this take place in a number of iterations over the years.
Okay, I just think it's cool, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilman Kathy.
It's great that they're going to put all of these things in, but who's going to take care of the long-term maintenance?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, the agreement that would be entered into with the Troopers organization would define the time frame by which those maintenance services would be provided. And so they will be responsible for the services to maintain the feature. And as far as I can tell, the costs associated with keeping it watered and that kind of thing, fertilized, et cetera.
Well, the reason I was asking is because however, the fact that it would probably be a permanent feature of the grounds, that's more what I was concerned about. I figured they would take care of it this growing season, but come 21, 22, 23, seems like that starts to be more of an added cost, and then does that wind up falling into Fort Casper's budget, or again, we're growing programs that we have no money to maintain?
Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kathy, you are correct. We do not want to maintain long-term features that we don't necessarily have the budget room or the operational capacity to embrace. And so that would be what I would advocate for, that once the maintenance aspect of the agreement has concluded, in my opinion, we would then determine whether or not we want to maintain that feature into the future. If not, then we may need to require that that situation be restored to its previous condition. But if I could defer to the attorney to provide some nuance there.
Great, thank you. And that really is a good question, something that was considered in adopting this resolution. And basically, there is a sunset provision for all of these donations. We say, well, into perpetuity for this agreement means 12 years is the max. And so basically, and you will have responsibilities if it's some type of an ongoing obligation. So here, it's contemplated in our discussions my discussions with Tim and his discussions with the Troopers representative, is that on a yearly basis, the Troopers will be out there doing the planting and gardening. So it'll be a little bit like an adoption of a planter, which again is referenced within here. So it's one of those things where we don't want to make it be an obligation upon the city or that the city has to provide on a yearly basis. So we have some outs here that if it doesn't get maintained or whatever, then we're certainly welcome to reuse that ground and erase it. And that would go with, whether it's plants or trees or benches or whatever, because you'll have some of those too. And sometimes they just don't fit. And that's why we wanted to have a firm cutoff. You give it to us in perpetuity doesn't mean we're going to have it displayed into perpetuity. So.
Thank you.
I guess I would add to that, Mr. Manager. Is there a way that we could write that up? I mean, I just, in talking to Sue with the troopers, I think that this is not going to be a one-time deal. It kind of seems to me like it's going to go on for a while, and the troopers have been here for how long? I mean, forever. But I do like the idea of having it written in there that if they abandon this idea, that they do need to take it back to the original way that it was at no cost to the city, and that way we don't have a continued cost moving forward. So it's on them now, but if they decide to ever leave that, they need to restore it back to the original form that it was in.
Mr. Mayor, I think we are exactly on the same page. I certainly wouldn't advocate that we enter into these kinds of relationships without some sort of agreement between the two parties, and in my estimation, that'd be a good place to elucidate those understandings. I agree.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions or comments? You're just giving a thumbs up. All right. Okay, I guess give it a thumbs up. Move forward. Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, I'm looking over the agenda here for next time, which would be a regular business meeting. And, aside from the conversation that would continue pertaining to animal care and control, the budget amendment, I think, will be one of those items we will need to cover. Beyond that, I wouldn't say that there are many significant items that I'd need to bring up tonight.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
So we have the individuals from Republic Parking coming, and I believe, I'm going to go ahead and guess that DDA is also going to want to comment on the downtown parking garage contract. I know we say here in parentheses, may be removed from consent. Is that something that we can just remove from consent now, or is that something that I would need to make a motion at the meeting?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Powell did submit a request to remove it from consent, and so my recommendation would be to do just that.
Perfect.
Anything else from anybody on the next council meeting on the agenda? Okay, and I'd like to discuss the August 11th work session. I've been approached by some members of the massage therapy community, and they, about a year ago, were trying to pass an ordinance, or wanted to see some legislation done that dealt with licensing of massage therapists to make it not that it's a legitimate business, but we got to face the fact that we have massage therapists that work in the industry of assisting people medically, I guess would be the best way of putting it. And then we have massage therapists that work in the industry of an entertainment industry, if you will. I'll put it that way. Yeah. So this movement is more of they're wanting to put an ordinance in place and work with the health department to legitimize the business, if you will, of massage therapists by requiring a license, because it's no different than having a cosmetologist needs to have a license to do business. Realtors have to have a license. So what's being proposed is that there would people would go to accredited institutions, be licensed to be massage therapist, and the business would have to be licensed itself. So I've asked that we draw up an ordinance and work with the health department in bringing this forward. And I'd like to have further conversation on this on the August 11th work session so we can talk through it and see how everybody feels about moving that forward to a regular work session. Now, talking on the entertainment side of things, years ago, for years, we've had problems with Tokyo Massage is an excellent example. That was a massage location of which illegal activity was taking place. And so we've changed the laws, the city ordinances over time to make almost any act illegal, but it still doesn't stop them from coming in and doing business in town. And we still, I can tell you, 3 different locations we talked about today that are not legitimate massage therapist business. And so I think by requiring a license of these businesses, it's a different way of addressing the illegal activity that's taken place. And right now, short of having law enforcement do undercover stings or have immigration go in and take care of the problem will still persist. So, and it just legitimizes a business, the people that actually go out and get the licensing and do it, do a legitimate business. So, so anyways, on the 11th, we're hoping to have a draft ordinance in place that we can discuss and see everybody's thoughts on it. So, Vice Mayor Luce.
Just really quick, because it's actually pretty new to Casper, we actually have a massage school here that I believe is working on becoming accredited. So she's probably a really great resource as far as like if we need terminology, as far as like types of certifications that are available or things of that nature. I believe her first name is Molly, and I'm going to forget her last name, but it's Mosaic Massage College.
She was actually in the lobby tonight and has given her information to the city clerk and is 100% behind this. And I guess I'll add to that too, that I've also got a couple other, we have seen some orthopedic doctors in town, doctors that have written letters on behalf of, they think this is a very good thing that needs to be done. She's been in business for a year now. I know it takes 2 years to get certified to be accredited, but she's working on that and in fact does want to come and be a part of that discussion. So, perfect. Councilman Bates.
Thank you. I know that this was brought up to the health department last year. I want to say in July of last year, August, and they talked about it. I know that they didn't agree to support it, to make it that way. And I think I even brought it up in a work session. I mentioned it as well. But so if we can reach out to Miss Ann or Dr. Dell even, because I know he said he wasn't for that either, if I remember correctly. So if we could reach out to maybe one of them to come to that and see where they're at now, I think that would be helpful.
So we've also already had those conversations, and the health department will be a part of the discussion on this. A year ago, there was a statewide movement to make this happen, and that did not happen. The city of Cheyenne did. They've got an ordinance in place or a health order with the health department in place dealing with this, but it did not go statewide. So that's why we're taking a run at it. Here is that putting an ordinance in place, and it's needed. The only thing that covers it right now is it falls under, well, it falls under a category that is exactly the reason why they want to get out of it. It falls under a moratorium of sexually oriented businesses, of which legitimate massage therapists do not belong underneath that. So, but they have been incorporated into the conversation. Good? Okay. Okay. Anything else in the work session for the 11th? Councilman Bates.
Thank you. I don't have for 11th, but I would like to add an item, if council desires. May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You all got the email, the same email that I received, that we received from Mr. Carter, regarding the wind turbines. And the more I'm reading about the wind turbines, I'm becoming more and more concerned about, I know we got a lot of land for at the landfill. I understand that. But that, if you guys read what I read, there's a lot coming. And they're projecting, if you read some of the websites, over 700,000 wind blades will need to be disposed of, one way or another. There is no efficient way of disposing these blades currently. And I know that we have a landfill that could last 100 years, but also I know that once sorry, I'm trying to remember what they say, once they put a cap on it, that those, I asked if they could ever be used again, if we could ever dig up, and put stuff there again, and I was told no, that we can never use those cells ever again. So though we have a lot of land, though we can take up those, but what are we doing long-term for the future generations in front of us that regarding the landfill, I guess, and taking these wind blades? I know it's a lot of money and I don't know how much money we're getting from them. I don't know if you do exactly, but money isn't everything when it comes to our environment for in the future, our landfill, everything that's going on, and I think we need to relook at this. If council is willing to, it's just a big concern of mine accepting how much we're looking at accepting. For just in Wyoming, we don't even do outside Wyoming, right? So that's a big concern of mine.
Do we want to add that to the list then, wind turbine discussion? Councilman Hopkins.
Well, before we go there, I think we need to look at this at total volume. 700,000 blades is not very much in terms of cubic yards. And if we're getting somewhere in the order of 50, 60 bucks a ton, as I recall, if the technology is really there, it's just pretty hard for me to believe and conceive that you can't actually make those smaller. All it takes is a big grinder, a big wood chipper. And you can certainly grind that up back dust to dust, if you will. And it was made from sand to begin with, and we have over 1,000 acres of land. If you go down, 30 feet at the bottom of a cell and you just reserve that for blades, I think you have to kind of look at the numbers before you say it's just a big number and we can't deal with it. I'm not sure we're even close to that at this point. And I know it's just, believe me, I'd rather build nuclear power plants than wind turbines, but this is just not a big issue. Thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Carter, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't the state legislature try to do that? I thought it passed that they were trying to take those wind turbines, those blades, and put them down a mine somewhere. They're trying to do that. I thought it was Senator, didn't that pass that so how does that affect us?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Pacheco, the basic upshot is that mines are now eligible to be deposit areas for blades. So as a mine's going through, reclamation and, backfilling, they can use blades as a backfill type thing. And that's really the gist of what actually was passed.
So it doesn't affect us? Either way. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilman Powell.
I happened to visit the wind facility just north of Medicine Bow on a clinical matter several weeks ago, And all of those blades are being ground up and used as road base. So I think those technologies are in place, and I do think that there will be a time where these blades that we're cutting up and burying will be recycled. I think that will happen.
It's gonna be a big grinder. Okay.
I'm willing to discuss it, but I think Ms. Langston will tell us that these are inert and they cause no trouble.
So is there any flavor for discussion on this? So indecisive. All right, we'll put it on there so that we can at least have a discussion about it. Okay. Anything else, Mr. City Manager, on that? Okay, legislative review.
Mr. Mayor, I have nothing tonight.
Okay, then we'll do council around the table, and we'll start with Councilman Bates.
Thank you. I have two questions, and they're, I just want clarification of one of them, and I don't know if you can answer, and if not, later, it's fine. But there's been a lot about the social media regarding the signs that we want to put around, and the number that they put out there. And I guess I just want to clarify the amount that was quoted, and I can't remember the amount exactly off the top of my head, and I apologize. Was that the amount for just Casper alone, or was the amount included, not just Casper, but Natrona County, bar none, Evansville, that will be contributing to that amount?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Bates, I probably do need to double check, but I want to say that the 185 signs that were quoted the other day in a similar gathering was just for Casper.
Okay.
But let me double check. I think the other thing that really needs to be clear too is council did not give authority and approval for that project to happen. Council said, go do some more homework and bring back your homework. So I think that needs to be abundantly clear, because I've seen some misstatements about the context of what actually happened there.
Okay, and thank you for
You
that
bet.
there. Mayor, if you don't mind me asking, Mr. Cortez, regarding that I've received not just one email, I've received 3 emails regarding the municipal golf course lawn, and how it's just, they're concerned of it's looking worse and worse day by day. Do you mind addressing that, if that's okay?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that is definitely a concern of ours. If you'll recall, we had a pump station, not just a pump, but a pump station that supplies water to the links go down. And if you recall also, we had that as a #1 project for FY21. The issue we had was the pump station basically cratered before July 1. Furthermore, we came to council immediately and asked if we could do a sole source on that project for 2 reasons. One, to get primarily what we really needed, which was with regard to water hammer and some other features. But number 2, that helped us replace that pump station in a timely manner. The downside is, even with your approval, it still takes 6 weeks to build the pump station. And so basically where we're at now is we're looking for delivery of that pump station on a week from today. And what we've done in the meantime is got the building ready to basically slide that pump station that's on a skid into there and get it operational as quickly as possible. We're currently able to provide water to the links by a bypass valve on our other pump station, but there's only so many hours in a day, and we have to water basically all 27 holes off of that one pump station. So that coupled with, you know, a pretty hot and windy summer, more than what we are used to experiencing, it certainly is causing us issues with regard to the turf. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I remember all that. I just wanted clarification. Thank you. And I'm done.
Okay. Councilman Johnson.
Just real quick, I won't be here for the August 11th council meeting. I have annual training for the Army. And there's potential that I won't be here the following Tuesday, but I don't know for sure yet. And then that's all I have, but I have to run.
Okay. Councilman Cathy.
The only thing I have is I wanted to mention something I forgot to mention last week that I found at the Chamber of Commerce meeting. Normally this time of year in Casper, hotel occupancy would be in the 90 percentile range. And last week at that meeting, hotel occupancy in Casper is at 49%. So that's possibly a reflection of tourism, but I don't think so. A friend of mine's in Jackson right now, and people are waiting in line to try to scoop up either campsites or motel reservations. They are at basically 100% and overflowing occupancy in campgrounds and hotels, motels in Jackson. So I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is probably related to the oil field. And as I have said, even when COVID's gone, Halliburton's moved out of town. They're selling their facility here. You saw in the newspaper, Schlumberger is laying off 150. Baker's bit salespeople are gone. Verrill's bit salespeople are gone. I can go down the list where Natco used to be out on the old Glen Rock Highway. That's a Cameron facility now, but they're closed. The Cameron Wellhead facility is down to 3 people. I mean, the oil prices have killed Casper in particular and Wyoming in general. And even though you see $41 WTI as of a week ago, and I didn't get to read it yesterday, I got another one today that I send you, but a week ago when WTI was at $40 and something, Wyoming sweet was at 32, sour is less than that. So we are still under $35 a barrel for Wyoming oil. So that's something I wanted to pass on. Good news, but reality.
Councilman Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As many of you know, I've been a firefighter for about 50 years. And in all those years, only 2 times I caught fire trucks on fire. And so when I mean to Councilman Cathy about his mishaps, you know, people just remember that stuff. They don't remember anything else, but by God, they remember those times. Other than that, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Councilman Pacheco.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Powell.
Just 2 things. We are, as I think everyone knows, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans for Disabilities Act. And I just want to remind everyone that our local Disability Council continues to meet virtually on a monthly basis. They expressed appreciation for the survey that was sent out in our water bills and that's on the website to learn a little more about their transportation challenges, which can be significant. And so they continue to do the best they can under trying circumstances to stay connected. And they very much appreciated their recent meeting with you, Carter, to talk about how the city can coordinate with their efforts and you know, try to make this community a little more inviting and accessible. So we also had a meeting of the DDA, and I guess Councilman Cathy gave us kind of his downside news. The DDA is struggling. They also had a problem with assessed valuation in their district. when we had our own issues with the assessed valuations citywide, but anytime their assessed valuations go down, their mill levy income goes down, which is their primary support, source of support for their operations. And so they're doing some homework to try to figure out how that happened. And of course, it's compounded by the fact that we haven't had any events at the station, which of course are used to pay for their staff time and their basic operations. And they also had no success applying for the PPP funds because of their status as a governmental agency. And so they were told at one point that there was going to be some flexibility from the state in terms of their access, but then they eventually found out that that was not going to be the case. So the DDA is hurting. And we did talk about the loss of the garage, and I don't think anyone was upset about that. I think they understood that it was a competitive bidding process, and as we note, that it has been a loser for them in terms of overall budget, but there are also staff that they would not be able to support without that money. So, and so they really just wanted to, the reason they wanted to talk to us about the process is to learn more about the rubric and the scoring system, and to make it a little more public matter as far as the decision, without necessarily challenging the validity of the decision. So I think that's it for me.
Vice Mayor Lutz.
Just one thing really quick. I have had a couple of complaints in the last few weeks about downtown parking enforcement. And they keep bringing up the fact that, and once again, they're not like saying names or like specific instances, but what they feel like is happening is that every time they kind of, rise up and complain, then they're told, well, we've hired somebody, we're training them, they're going to be out there. And then it never happens. And then like 6 months later, they're like, guys, like this is getting really bad. And then they're told, oh, well, something happened and now we've hired somebody and they're going to be out there. And then nothing happens. And so I think there's just a lot of tension building up because they feel like they keep being told there's going to be a resolution and there isn't. And I can tell you, I work just off of downtown and I'll drive by at 8 o'clock in the morning. No establishment is open downtown and half the spots are already filled and they're the same cars that are there at 5 p.m. So, I mean, we have to get, I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not being sassy, but I really do think that there's a large call for us to actually enforce downtown street parking.
Okay, I don't have anything tonight either, so I guess that is it. Thank you.